Our presentation on A Bed Called Home by Mamphela Ramphele highlights the importance of bed ownership for migrant workers and local families of South Africa and the Cape Town area. Having access to accommodations is the key to survival in this poverty-ridden, oppressive environment. Our exploration of the hostel as an institution will reveal how empowerment is limited, but can still be either gained or eliminated based on the politics, practices, coping mechanisms, and creativity of hostel residents encompassing the bedhold.
The people of Cape Town had a labor vacuum which could only be filled by the underpaid and underprivileged migrant workers. The powers within South Africa tactically made life just bearable enough for peoples to survive, while being careful to not allow them to thrive or build their families in Cape Town. This denial of legitimacy was an assault that could be defined by the dimensions of space outlined by Ramphele, those four being physical space, pertaining to the space appropriate for one to use; political economic space, access to political and economic resources; ideological intellectual space, pertaining to the way one could be allowed to think in an area; and finally, psychosocial space, mostly pertaining to the mental health of people trying to maintain their dignity despite dehumanizing laws. Small rooms in poorly constructed buildings were the homes of multiple families. Each family is based in a patriarchal structure based upon the bed holders of the establishment. A person's bed was his claim to a room for himself and his dependents. This was all in response to the British notion that no one of color should be in Cape Town that wasn't working. The government agreed with these notions and decided to create legislative barriers. Those barriers came in the form of a plethora of acts, including the Black Consolidation Act of 1945, the Black Act of 1952, and the Native Laws Act of 1957. These rules, as many others, restricted movement, removed undesirables, and created qualifications for entry into hostels and cities. Those three qualifications being employment, duration of employment, and availability of resources.
Chapters 4 through 6 discuss the physical, political economic, ideological intellectual, and psychosocial aspects of sickness, social hierarchies, and relationships that comprise the hostel environment. Chapter 4, titled The Quest for Wholeness, studies how physical and mental illnesses conflict with the social and economic roles of workers in the hostel environment. Sickness isn't only a physical perception of pain, but also a mindset individuals are forced to adapt in order to cope with the horrible circumstances they're faced with. Throughout this chapter, Ramphele touches on various health institutions aimed at aiding illness, including biomedical resources and traditional healing. One of the major differences between the two healing processes is the biomedical view is completely physical, while traditional healing focuses on mental ideologies surrounding health. Three main diseases highlighted in this chapter include STDs, tuberculosis, and alcoholism, all of which play into the physical degradation of health, emotional distress, and economic and social instability. Sickness and empowerment are closely related when analyzing women in traditional healing roles. The affordability of illness is backed by a woman's ability to become a folk healer. Traditional healing in the present-day hostel regions is becoming more popular due to the fact that women can utilize traditional healing as a reliable source of income. This allows women to take control of their political economic spaces as they become less dependent on their male counterparts. Traditional healing also provides a mental healing process for everyone involved. Healers and clients can take advantage of this ideological, intellectual space that provides safety from anxiety and feelings of worthlessness that arise from living in such an oppressive environment. Women especially find solace from traditional healers as they can escape the abusive hands of men. The psychosocial sphere of space is also well represented in the folk healing community. Women tend to ignore the competition for accommodation when sickness, grief, or abuse strike. The section titled Social Organization covers the daily routine of hostel dwellers, the authority structure the hostel environment is built upon, the limited leisure activities that are available, and the various social networks that provide support throughout the hostel communities. Some of these social networks include credit clubs, burial societies, and religious groups. It's important to note that daily routines and authority structures were controlled by men. The section titled Social Relations addresses the variety of relationships among hostel dwellers. The relationship between men and women is mutually abusive. In order for some women to secure accommodations and financial stability, they must actively please their male counterparts, which can destroy feelings of dignity and independence while harming the man financially and emotionally as he realizes he is being used solely as a space. To emphasize the control that men have on women, they are allowed to abuse their wives as long as they don't disrupt the peace of the hostile environment. Also, men can stop women from using contraceptives so that if they get pregnant, they know that their wife is being disloyal. Men, on the other hand, can have extramarital relationships, and it's not a problem.
Chapter 7 covers the effects Hostile Dwellers Association, or the HDA, which is similar to a labor union, had on the community and reactions from hostile dwelling community towards the HDA. The HDA was first introduced in 1983, but was officiated in 1985. Membership growth was slow. The amount of people actively participating in the HDA changed depending on which living quarter was observed. For example, places with higher bed counts have higher membership. On the other hand, places with less bed counts or more stable accommodations, like special quarters and old flats in Lagna, are less likely to find themselves as members of the HDA. Women are amongst the ranks of the HDA and have their own separate committees. However, women committees are subordinate to the main male-dominated committees. The HDA tried to launch many projects for the benefit of their members, such as childcare and medical facilities. These were largely unsuccessful and discontinued due to the lack of resources. There were many complaints in regards to the HDA, the most significant one being the lack of strong leadership and poor organizational skills. The Hostel Dwellers Association was originally known as the Western Cape Men's Hostel Association. The association was formed to keep the relationship between hostel residents and township residents peaceful and to negate violence between hostel dwellers and themselves. It set itself many goals within its constitution, which were to seek the recognition of the God-given right of people to live with their families near their places of work, to campaign for the provision of family housing and special married quarters, to work for full residence and employment rights, and an end to the present contract system, to work for the upgrading of facilities and amenities, to encourage and provide opportunities for adult education and cultural activities. It changed to the Hostel Dwellers Association in order to include women. While the change of the name was made in order to obtain more members, many also challenged this notion. WOSA tradition separated men and women into different spheres of work, putting women in charge of more domestic responsibilities, such as cooking, cleaning, and other duties to serve their husbands. Duties such as cooking meals often took place during the same time as meetings would be taking place. This was seen as a practical problem, as there would be supposedly no one to make food for the people returning from HDA activities. Legitimizing women as official residents was also challenged by the idea that including women would complicate relationships between men and other men and would also make women more jealous of each other in the work environment. In the end, women were included anyways, despite the negative feelings towards the change. Empowerment, in terms of this book, is the process of shifting the perceptions of subordinate people, enabling them to assume greater control over their own lives. It acknowledges the humanity of people who have been systematically oppressed and enables them to fight their oppressors. It also analyzes the coping mechanisms of marginalized people and tries to make them change, or at least recognize that these strategies can perpetuate systematic oppression. In the empowerment section, some of the hostel residents had a negative view on the concept of empowerment. Some critics say that the concept is patronizing and that people have their own power and don't need support from outside influences. The empowerment of women was mostly shunned. Bringing women outside of the domestic responsibilities was against WOSA tradition. Some men describe it as being a matter of self-esteem. Since black men were at the bottom of South African hierarchy, only above women and children, having women be equal to them would only make them lose their ability to control or have power over something or someone. Some who saw that excluding women was wrong, but were afraid of the changes, brought up the point that hostels aren't places to be raising families.
The discovery of diamonds is what ultimately led to the exploitation of labor and the creation of hostels. As migrant workers came from their rural homes to work in the diamond mine, they were assimilated into the workforce and locked inside labor housing that would later develop into this terrible, oppressive, hostile society. Ever since the British colonials set foot in South Africa, South African empowerment has been on the decline, only kept alive by creativity and the various healthy and unhealthy coping mechanisms available.